What happens when America's sweetheart meets late-night television's most unpredictable host, and everything goes spectacularly wrong? Tonight, we're diving into the explosive confrontation that had security rushing the stage and left an entire studio audience in stunned silence. This is the story of how a simple promotional interview turned into the most talked-about television meltdown in recent memory, and why Julia Roberts stormed off the Jimmy Kimmel live set in a way that nobody saw coming. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because this story has more twists than you can imagine. The tension was already thick in the air before Julia Roberts even stepped foot on the Jimmy Kimmel live stage. Behind the scenes, whispers had been circulating among the production crew about some last-minute changes to the interview format. What was supposed to be a standard promotional appearance for her latest film had somehow morphed into something entirely different, though nobody could have predicted just how different it would become. Julia arrived at the studio that evening with her usual professional demeanor, but those who knew her well could sense something was off. Her publicist had been making unusual demands all week, insisting on pre-approval of questions and threatening to pull the appearance multiple times. The Jimmy Kimmel Live production team, known for their flexibility with A-list guests, had been accommodating, but there were limits to how much control they were willing to surrender. The makeup chair conversations revealed the first cracks in what should have been a routine appearance. Julia seemed distracted, constantly checking her phone and whispering intensely with her team. When asked about her mood by the makeup artist, she simply replied that some people in Hollywood needed to learn respect, a comment that would prove prophetic, given what was about to unfold on live television. Jimmy himself seemed unaware of any brewing storm as he went through his pre-show routine. His writers had prepared what they considered to be a fairly standard set of questions, mixing promotional content with light-hearted banter about her career and personal life. They had even included a fun segment involving audience participation that they thought would showcase Julia's famous charm and infectious laugh. The audience filed in with typical excitement, many of them Julia Roberts fans who had specifically requested tickets when they learned she would be appearing. The energy in the studio was electric, with people taking selfies and sharing their excitement on social media about seeing the pretty woman star up close. Nobody in that audience could have imagined they were about to witness television history in the making. As the show's opening credits rolled, Julia took her position in the green room, declining the usual pre-interview chat with Jimmy that most guests enjoyed. Her team formed a protective circle around her, and there were heated whispered conversations that the production assistants couldn't quite make out. The stage manager noticed the unusual tension, but assumed it was just typical pre-show nerves from a major celebrity. When Jimmy delivered his opening monologue, he seemed in particularly good spirits, cracking jokes about current events and building up the anticipation for his guest. He made several references to Julia's legendary status in Hollywood and her reputation as one of the most beloved actresses of her generation. The audience responded enthusiastically, completely unaware that their beloved star was backstage having what could only be described as a heated discussion with her representation. The band struck up their familiar tune as Jimmy prepared to introduce his guest, but in the wings, drama was unfolding that would change everything. Julia's publicist was seen making frantic phone calls while her agent paced back and forth, gesturing wildly. Whatever had triggered this behind-the-scenes chaos was about to explode onto the stage in front of millions of viewers. As Jimmy began his introduction, calling Julia one of America's most treasured actresses, the woman herself was taking deep breaths and steeling herself for what she clearly anticipated would be a battle. Her usual pre-interview smile was replaced by a look of determination that her team recognized as her preparing for war. The stage lights dimmed as the introduction reached its crescendo, and Julia Roberts walked onto the Jimmy Kimmel Live stage for what would become the most infamous guest appearance in the show's history. The audience erupted in applause as she made her entrance, but even from the very first steps, something felt different. Her trademark megawatt smile seemed forced, and she barely acknowledged the crowd's enthusiasm. Jimmy approached her with his usual warm greeting and hug, but the embrace was notably brief and awkward, lacking the genuine warmth that typically characterized his interactions with beloved guests like Julia. As they settled into their chairs, the camera caught subtle signs of tension that most viewers would miss on first viewing. Julia's posture was rigid, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, and she avoided making direct eye contact with Jimmy during his opening pleasantries. When he complimented her dress and asked how she was doing, her response was clipped and professional rather than the bubbly, engaging personality America had come to expect from her. Jimmy, ever the professional, attempted to steer the conversation toward safe territory by asking about her latest project. But even this seemingly innocent question triggered an unexpected response that would set the tone for everything that followed. Julia's answer was surprisingly sharp, with an undertone that suggested she had grievances that went far beyond anything related to her current film promotion. The studio audience began to sense that something unusual was happening, though they couldn't quite put their finger on what was wrong. The chemistry between host and guest, usually so natural and entertaining, felt forced and uncomfortable. Jimmy's attempts at his trademark humor were met with polite but cold responses that lacked Julia's usual warmth and spontaneity. What nobody in the audience knew was that this tension had been building for weeks, rooted in behind-the-scenes Hollywood politics that were about to explode into public view. The promotional interview that was supposed to celebrate Julia's latest career achievement was instead about to become the battleground for grievances that had been simmering in the entertainment industry's power circles for months. As Jimmy prepared to ask his next question, Julia shifted in her chair and fixed him with a look that made it clear she was done with pleasantries. The smile that had charmed audiences for decades disappeared completely, replaced by an expression that promised fireworks. In that moment, everyone in the studio sensed that they were about to witness something extraordinary, though nobody could have predicted just how explosive the next few minutes would become. The moment Jimmy asked his next question, everything changed. He had prepared what he thought was a lighthearted inquiry about her experiences working with her latest co-star, but Julia's response cut through the air like a knife. Instead of the expected Hollywood pleasantries, she looked directly into the camera and said, "You know what, Jimmy? I think it's time we talked about the real issues in this industry, instead of pretending everything is sunshine and rainbows." The studio fell silent. Jimmy's smile faltered as he realized this wasn't going according to script. He attempted to redirect with a nervous laugh, saying, "Well, we love talking about real issues here, but our audience came to see the Julia Roberts we all know and love." That comment proved to be gasoline on an already smoldering fire. Julia's eyes flashed as she leaned forward in her chair. "The Julia Roberts you all know and love? You mean the one who's supposed to smile pretty and sell movies without ever speaking up about the garbage that goes on behind closed doors? Is that the version you want tonight, Jimmy?" Her voice carried an edge that made everyone in the studio shift uncomfortably in their seats. Jimmy tried to maintain his composure, but you could see the panic starting to creep in. His writers hadn't prepared him for this scenario. "Julia, I think maybe we got off on the wrong foot here. Why don't we talk about your new film? I heard it's getting incredible reviews." He was clearly trying to steer back to safer territory, but Julia was having none of it. "My new film," she repeated, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "You mean the film that almost didn't get made because certain people in this industry think they can control every aspect of an actor's career? The film where I had to fight tooth and nail just to maintain creative input, because some executives think actresses are just pretty faces who should do what they're told." The audience was completely captivated now, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. Jimmy's discomfort was becoming more visible by the second. He glanced toward his producers off stage, clearly looking for guidance on how to handle a guest who had gone completely off script. "Look, Julia," Jimmy said, attempting to regain control of the interview, I understand you're passionate about these issues, and they're important, but maybe we could discuss them in a way that's more, appropriate for our format." The word appropriate seemed to trigger something even deeper in Julia's frustration. She let out a laugh that had zero warmth in it. Appropriate? Jimmy, what's not appropriate is the way this industry treats people, especially women, and then expects us to show up and play nice while promoting our work. What's not appropriate is having to smile and pretend everything is fine when people behind the scenes are making decisions that affect our careers without any input from us. Jimmy was visibly sweating now, realizing that this interview was spiraling completely out of control. The live television format meant there was no way to cut away or edit out what was happening. Millions of viewers were watching in real time, as one of Hollywood's biggest stars had what appeared to be a complete meltdown on his show. "I'm not sure what specific situation you're referring to," Jimmy said carefully, "but if there are industry issues you want to discuss, maybe we could approach them in a more constructive way." His attempt at diplomacy only seemed to fuel Julia's fire. "Constructive?" Julia's voice rose slightly. "You want to know what would be constructive, Jimmy? How about we start with the fact that certain talk show hosts make jokes about actresses' personal lives, their relationships, their age, their appearance, and then expect those same actresses to come on their shows and laugh along like it's all just harmless fun?" The accusation hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Jimmy's face went pale as he realized Julia was essentially calling him out directly. The audience was dead silent, unsure whether they should be watching or looking away from what was clearly becoming a very personal confrontation. "Julia, I'm not sure what you're implying," Jimmy stammered, but she cut him off before he could finish his thought. "I'm not implying anything, Jimmy. I'm stating it directly. You've made jokes about my personal life, my relationships, my choices just like you do with other actresses who come on this show. And then we're expected to sit here and smile and laugh along because it's all just part of the game, right? Well, I'm tired of playing that game." Jimmy was now in full damage, control mode, but every attempt he made to defuse the situation only seemed to make things worse. "If I've ever said anything that offended you, Julia, that certainly wasn't my intention. Comedy can sometimes cross lines, and I apologize if anything I've said has hurt you." But Julia wasn't accepting his apology. "It's not just about me, Jimmy. It's about the pattern. It's about how female guests are treated differently than male guests. It's about how women's personal lives become punchlines while men's accomplishments get celebrated. It's about a system that's broken and everyone just accepts it because that's how it's always been done." The studio was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Even the band seemed frozen, unsure whether they should be ready to play her off or just stay out of the way. Jimmy's producers were frantically communicating through their headsets, trying to figure out how to salvage what had become a complete disaster. Jimmy made one more desperate attempt to regain control. "Julia, these are really important points you're making, and I think our audience appreciates hearing your perspective. Maybe we could continue this conversation in a way that's productive for everyone?" But his words came across as condescending, and Julia's reaction was immediate and explosive. She stood up abruptly, her chair sliding backward with the force of her movement. "Productive for everyone? Or productive for your show's ratings? Because let me tell you something, Jimmy. I didn't come here tonight to be managed or handled or told how to express my concerns in a way that makes everyone comfortable." The audience gasped audibly as Julia remained standing, towering over Jimmy, who was still seated and looking increasingly desperate. This was clearly not how anyone had expected the evening to go, and the tension in the studio was so thick it was almost suffocating. "I think maybe we should take a commercial break," Jimmy suggested weakly, but Julia shook her head firmly. "No, Jimmy, no commercial break. No editing this out later. No spinning this into something it's not. For once, let's just have an honest conversation about what really goes on in this industry, instead of pretending everything is perfect." Her voice carried a determination that made it clear she wasn't backing down, no matter how uncomfortable everyone else in the studio had become. Jimmy looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. The interview had become a public confrontation, and there was no easy way out. The audience watched in fascination and horror as two of entertainment's biggest personalities faced off, in what was becoming the most uncomfortable television moment in recent memory. What happened next would determine whether this confrontation would end in resolution or complete chaos. But one thing was certain. Nobody in that studio would ever forget what they were witnessing, and the entertainment industry would be talking about this moment for years to come. Jimmy's face flushed red as he realized there was no escaping this confrontation. Standing up to meet Julia's energy, he said, "Okay, Julia, you want honest? Let's be honest. You came on my show tonight with an agenda that had nothing to do with promoting your film. You've turned what should have been a fun interview into a personal attack, and frankly, that's not fair to me or to our audience." The words hit Julia like a slap. Her eyes narrowed dangerously as she stepped closer to his desk. A personal attack? Jimmy, pointing out problematic behavior isn't a personal attack. It's holding people accountable. But I guess that's uncomfortable. When you're used to everyone just going along with whatever you say because you're the host. I treat all my guests with respect, Jimmy shot back, his own frustration finally boiling over. And if you had specific concerns, there are appropriate ways to address them. Ambushing me on live television isn't one of them. His voice carried an edge that his audience rarely heard, and it was clear that Julia's accusations had struck a nerve. Julia laughed bitterly. Appropriate ways? You mean like going through agents and publicists and network executives who would make sure nothing ever changes? You mean like having private conversations that lead to nothing while the same patterns continue? No, Jimmy. Sometimes the only way to create real change is to make people uncomfortable. The studio audience was completely transfixed, many of them pulling out their phones to record what was clearly becoming a historic television moment. Jimmy noticed the phones, and it seemed to fuel his anger even more. So this is all a publicity stunt then? You're using my show to make some kind of statement? That accusation was the final straw for Julia. Her voice rose to a level that made everyone in the studio freeze. A publicity stunt? You think I would destroy my reputation and probably my career just for publicity? Jimmy, this is about principle. This is about not being able to sit quietly anymore while people like you make millions joking about women's pain, and then act surprised when we finally speak up. Jimmy's composure completely cracked. People like me? Julia, I've supported women in this industry my entire career. I've used my platform to highlight important issues. You don't get to come on my show and paint me as some kind of villain because you're having a bad day. A bad day? Julia's voice was now loud enough that people in the lobby could probably hear her. Jimmy, this isn't about a bad day. This is about years of watching talented women be reduced to punchlines while men get to be taken seriously. This is about being told to smile and be grateful while people profit off our discomfort. The band leader was frantically looking between Jimmy and his producers, clearly unsure whether he should start playing music to try to diffuse the situation. The audience was split between those who were filming and those who were too shocked to move. Some people near the front could be heard whispering to each other about whether they should leave. Jimmy threw his hands up in exasperation. Fine, Julia. You've made your point. You've called me out on live television. You've made everyone in this studio uncomfortable. What exactly do you want from me now? What's your end game here? Julia stared at him for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was deadly calm. I want you to acknowledge that there's a problem. I want you to admit that the way women are treated in entertainment, including on your show, needs to change. And I want you to commit to doing better instead of getting defensive and making this about your feelings. My feelings? Jimmy's voice cracked with disbelief. Julia, you've spent the last 10 minutes attacking my character and my show on live. Television. And you're upset that I'm defensive? What did you expect would happen here? Julia's response was swift and cutting. I expected you to listen. I expected you to show some understanding of why women in this industry are frustrated. Instead, you've proven every point I've made by making yourself the victim in this conversation. The tension reached a breaking point when Jimmy slammed his hand on his desk. I am not the villain here, Julia, and I won't be lectured about my character by someone who came on my show under false pretenses just to ambush me with accusations. Julia took a step back, but her resolve didn't waver. False pretenses? Jimmy, I came here to do my job, just like I always do. But I'm not going to pretend anymore that everything is fine when it's not. I'm not going to smile and laugh along with jokes that hurt people just to make everyone else comfortable. That's when Jimmy made the decision that would define this entire incident. Looking directly at his producers off stage, he said loudly, I think this interview is over. Julia, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the stage. The audience gasped, collectively. Julia's eyes went wide with shock and anger. You're kicking me off your show? For telling the truth? For standing up for what's right? Her voice carried a mixture of disbelief and fury that made everyone in the studio hold their breath. I'm ending an interview that stopped being an interview and became a public attack, Jimmy replied firmly. Security, can you please escort Miss Roberts from the stage? The word security seemed to echo through the studio like a gunshot. Julia stood frozen for a moment, clearly not believing that it had come to this. When two security guards appeared from the wings, the reality of the situation hit everyone at once. You're actually doing this, Julia said, her voice filled with a mixture of hurt and anger. You're having me physically removed because I challenged you. This is exactly the kind of behavior I was talking about, Jimmy. This is exactly why women stay silent. As the security guards approached, Julia held up her hand. Don't touch me. I'll leave on my own. She turned to face the audience one final time, her voice carrying across the silent studio. This is what happens when women speak up in this industry. Remember this moment. She walked toward the exit with her head held high, but turned back, one last time to face Jimmy. You had a chance to be part of the solution tonight, Jimmy. Instead, you chose to be part of the problem. With that, she walked off the stage, leaving behind a studio full of stunned audience members and a host who looked like he had just witnessed his own career implode. Jimmy stood alone at his desk, the silence deafening. He looked out at the audience, many of whom were still filming, and realized that this moment would be replayed and analyzed for years to come. The band finally started playing, but it felt hollow and awkward, like background music to a disaster. As the credits began to roll, Jimmy attempted to address what had just happened. Ladies and gentlemen, that was not how anyone expected this evening to go. Sometimes television is unpredictable, and tonight was certainly one of those nights. His words felt inadequate for what the audience had just witnessed. The studio slowly began to empty, but people lingered, talking in hushed, excited tones about what they had just seen. Phone cameras were still recording as people processed the fact that they had witnessed what would undoubtedly become one of the most talked-about moments in late-night television history. What started as a routine promotional interview had become a defining moment that would spark conversations about power, respect, and accountability in Hollywood for months to come. Julia Roberts had indeed made her point, but at what cost? And Jimmy Kimmel was left to face the aftermath of a confrontation that nobody could have predicted but everyone would remember. So what do you think? Was Julia Roberts justified in her confrontation, or did she go too far? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more shocking stories from behind the scenes of Hollywood. The entertainment industry is full of moments like these, and we'll continue bringing you the stories that everyone's talking about.